It was a bright morning at the airport. Passengers shuffled through security, coffee cups in hand, earbuds in, scrolling through their phones. Amid the crowd, Chuck Norris walked calmly, carrying nothing more than a small carry-on and his signature aura of quiet confidence. People glanced at him, some recognizing him instantly, but most were too busy to pay attention. Chuck approached the gate for his flight. As he presented his boarding pass, he smiled politely at the attendant. "Good morning. I'd like to request first class," he said casually. There was no arrogance in his tone, just the simple expectation of courtesy. The flight attendant frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, sir. First class is fully booked today." Chuck nodded once, keeping his calm. "I see. Thank you." He turned and made his way toward the economy section, his steps measured, eyes scanning the terminal but relaxed. Passengers in the vicinity noticed the unusual situation. A man of Chuck Norris's reputation denied first class? Whispers began to spread. People tried to catch a glimpse of him, some already pulling out their phones. A few joked quietly. "Can you believe it? That's Chuck Norris, and he can't get a seat upgrade." Chuck seated himself in the economy section. He placed his bag gently in the overhead compartment, then settled into his seat. The atmosphere around him was tense, though Chuck remained unfazed. He opened a magazine, casually flipping pages, all while maintaining a composed expression. Nearby passengers couldn't help but notice his calmness. Some expected him to protest or make a scene, but Chuck's demeanor was different. He didn't argue, didn't demand, didn't complain. He simply accepted the situation with quiet dignity. The flight attendant glanced back at him a few times, uneasy. Something about Chuck's presence made the air feel heavier, charged, as if even a single misstep could ripple through the entire cabin. Little did anyone know, this calm, composed man in economy class was about to turn what seemed like a small inconvenience into an unforgettable event. What happens next is something no passenger would expect. Stay tuned, because in just 12 minutes, the plane would stop and everything would change. The plane doors closed, engines roared, and passengers settled into their seats, unaware that the day was about to take an unusual turn. Chuck Norris, seated in economy, remained composed. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the buzzing murmurs of passengers around him. Everyone could feel it. Something in the air was different. The flight attendant, still uneasy, glanced at Chuck once more. There was no overt hostility, only a subtle tension that grew with every passing second. Chuck didn't react. He simply adjusted his seatbelt and leaned back, exuding an aura of quiet confidence. For the first few minutes, the flight was ordinary. People chatted, headphones played music, and the plane started its ascent smoothly. But then a subtle shift occurred. The attendant walked past Chuck and accidentally fumbled a passenger's drink. In an instant, Chuck's attention was on the small commotion, but he didn't react aggressively or criticize. He simply gave a measured nod, his eyes calm, yet piercing, as if silently communicating, "Everything will be fine." Passengers around him began whispering. Some recognized him immediately. "Is that Chuck Norris?" One woman whispered to her friend. Phones were subtly raised, cameras turned on, but no one dared disturb him. Chuck didn't look up. He didn't smile. He simply remained the calm, eye in a storm of ordinary chaos. Tension slowly crept in. The attendants noticed small signs of mechanical irregularities on the cockpit display, subtle alarms that passengers couldn't hear but were registering on screens. Chuck's eyes flicked toward the cockpit briefly, his expression unreadable. The murmurs grew louder. People began commenting under their breath about how strange it was to see Chuck sitting quietly, not demanding first class, not arguing, not causing a scene. "If I were in his place," muttered one passenger, "I'd have flipped out." Chuck, meanwhile, remained entirely composed, almost meditative. That if you were in Chuck Norris's seat right now, what would you do? Would you stay calm or demand attention? Comment below and tell us which city or country you're watching this from. Minutes passed, and the subtle tension increased. The flight attendants began glancing nervously at Chuck, sensing something was off. His calmness, they realized, wasn't ordinary. There was an energy about him that made even the most confident airline staff hesitate. Every movement he made, every slight gesture, felt intentional yet understated. Then, 12 minutes into the flight, the first signs of true unease appeared. A small vibration ran through the cabin, not strong enough to cause panic, but noticeable. The plane's subtle humming shifted, almost like it had encountered resistance. Passengers murmured, clutching their armrests lightly, exchanging uneasy glances. Chuck's gaze scanned the interior, calm, assessing, aware of every movement. A passenger sitting near the aisle whispered, "Did anyone else feel that?" Others nodded, tension rising. The attendants exchanged nervous glances, their training telling them to stay calm, but instinct screaming that something unusual was happening. Chuck, however, did not move. He simply leaned back slightly, as if drawing in the collective anxiety around him, neutralizing it with sheer presence. By now, more people had begun subtly recording. Phones hovered discreetly, capturing Chuck's demeanor, the shifting expressions of flight attendants, and the murmurs of the worried passengers. It was as if everyone instinctively knew that this was not going to be an ordinary flight. Chuck glanced at a nearby monitor displaying minor system warnings. Again, no reaction, just that trademark calm stare. Some passengers felt a chill. Some whispered to each other, "How can one man stay this calm when everyone else is panicking?" The flight attendants, realizing that nothing they could do would disturb him, started moving cautiously around the cabin. Even small gestures, passing snacks, adjusting seats, felt amplified in the charged atmosphere. Chuck's quiet awareness was magnetic. Everyone noticed it, consciously or subconsciously. And in that moment, 12 minutes into a flight that started like any other, the first signs of something extraordinary were about to manifest. A plane full of passengers, all tense, all watching, none aware of what was truly about to happen, but everyone feeling that something significant was on the horizon. Stay tuned, because in just a few moments, the plane will stop midair and Chuck Norris will show why calmness, presence, and precision can change everything in an instant. The plane had reached cruising altitude, but the atmosphere inside the cabin was anything but ordinary. The passengers, still whispering about the mysterious calm of Chuck Norris, began to sense that something subtle was wrong. Minor vibrations ran through the cabin, unnoticed by the flight crew at first, but felt by those seated near the wings. Drinks rattled slightly, some passengers gripped their armrests, and even the flight attendants' confident expressions showed cracks of unease. Chuck Norris, seated in economy, didn't flinch. He scanned the cabin with piercing eyes, noting every movement, every twitch of unease. His posture was relaxed, almost meditative, but there was a tension beneath that calm, a quiet alertness, a readiness to act if needed. Passengers around him felt a strange mix of awe and unease, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. One elderly man near the window whispered nervously to his wife, "Why isn't anyone doing anything? Look at him. He's not even worried." The wife shushed him, but even she stole glances at Chuck. Phones quietly emerged, recording the moment, capturing the contrast between a world-famous action hero sitting silently and the growing tension among passengers. The flight attendants moved through the aisle, checking on passengers, trying to reassure them that everything was normal. But their glances toward Chuck betrayed their doubt. There was something in his eyes, in his very presence, that silently demanded respect, and even subtle obedience. Suddenly, a soft alarm beeped from the cockpit, barely audible but enough to make the crew tense. The passengers didn't notice at first, but the attendants did. One whispered to another, "Do you feel that? Something's not right." The other nodded, her eyes flicking toward Chuck. Chuck leaned slightly forward, a calm, yet commanding presence. He didn't speak, but his gaze seemed to assess the problem in a way no one else could. Passengers instinctively leaned closer, whispering to each other, caught between curiosity and fear. "Is he noticing something we can't?" murmured a young man to his friend. Then turbulence hit, a soft, uneven shaking that made passengers grip their armrests tighter. Some murmured nervously. A child cried quietly. The flight attendants immediately moved, to reassure passengers, but their actions seemed almost slow compared to the intensity of the moment. Chuck, however, remained a beacon of composure. He adjusted his seat slightly, subtly signaling to a flight attendant nearby, who glanced back at him nervously. Chuck's silent confidence communicated a message without words. Stay calm. Don't panic. Everything is under control. That if you were sitting here, would you stay calm like Chuck or panic? Type your answer in the comments below. As the minutes passed, the minor turbulence grew slightly more noticeable. Drinks spilled lightly, some passengers whispered frantic theories, and others tried to comfort each other. Yet Chuck remained unshaken. His presence seemed to slow the panic around him, creating a psychological buffer, a calm within the storm. The murmurs grew louder. People began to speculate about Chuck's identity and influence. "That's Chuck Norris," someone whispered. "If anyone can handle this, it's him." Others took out their phones, recording his every movement, capturing the serene authority he projected amidst rising tension. The flight attendants exchanged nervous glances. "He's not just calm, he's almost controlling the atmosphere," one said quietly. Another nodded, unable to deny the impact of his presence. Even pilots, focused on their instruments, couldn't ignore the subtle shift of energy radiating from economy class. And then, without warning, the plane's soft vibrations intensified just slightly. Nothing dangerous yet, but enough to make every passenger aware that something was amiss. Phones buzzed in pockets, whispers grew into murmurs, and passengers instinctively leaned closer to Chuck, seeking reassurance. Chuck's gaze swept over the cabin once more. No words, no panic, just steady, unwavering attention. The message was clear: remain calm, and the situation will resolve. Yet everyone could feel the tension building, knowing that the next moment could change everything. The countdown had begun. 12 minutes into the flight, subtle warnings had been triggered, turbulence had unsettled the cabin, and the mental trap for every viewer was set. The audience, both on board and watching via future viral video, felt the rising suspense. Something was coming. Something incredible. In the next moments, the passengers are about to witness Chuck Norris in a way they've never seen before. The plane, the crew, and even the audience will realize he's not just calm. He's in control of the impossible. The plane hummed steadily through the clouds, but the cabin's atmosphere had transformed. Every passenger was alert, sensing that something unusual was happening. Drinks rattled in cups, phones buzzed quietly, and whispers floated from seat to seat. Chuck Norris, seated in economy, remained completely calm, a beacon of composure amid the mounting tension. Passengers around him kept stealing glances, some subtly pointing their phones in his direction. Many had recognized him by now. Chuck Norris, the man whose reputation for precision and control was legendary. Yet, despite this, Chuck said nothing. He didn't raise his voice, didn't call over the crew, didn't demand first class. He simply observed, attentive to the smallest details, as if reading the invisible currents of energy within the cabin. The flight attendants moved carefully, adjusting seats, serving drinks, and offering reassurances. But the subtle alarms in the cockpit had not abated. The vibrations, faint but noticeable, continued. One attendant whispered to another, "I've never seen him like this. He's not just calm, he's analyzing." Chuck's gaze swept over the cabin, resting briefly on a small group of nervous passengers near the back. He noticed a woman gripping her child tightly, her eyes wide with fear. Without speaking, he gave her a small, reassuring nod. It was the kind of gesture that transmitted confidence without a single word. Immediately, she relaxed, letting go of some of the tension she had been holding. Nearby, a man with a camera phone tried to capture Chuck on video, whispering to his friend, "Do you see that? He's not doing anything, and yet everyone is watching him like he's controlling the plane." Indeed, passengers felt it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The calm authority Chuck radiated seemed to neutralize fear, even in the presence of minor turbulence. But the plane was not yet fully stable. Small warning lights blinked faintly in the cockpit, and a soft, mechanical hum hinted at something more serious. Chuck's attention was now split between the subtle cues of the plane and the reactions of the passengers around him. He leaned slightly forward, a quiet signal, and a flight attendant instinctively understood. Stay calm. Follow instructions. Trust him. If you were sitting near Chuck Norris right now, would you feel safer or more nervous? Type your answer below, and don't forget to tell us your city and country. The murmurs of recognition grew louder. Whispers spread quickly. That's Chuck Norris, the man from movies. If anyone can handle this, it's him. Phones quietly recorded, capturing not just his image, but the aura of control he projected. People's attention was fully drawn to him, even as subtle mechanical issues hinted at a growing problem. Suddenly, a faint vibration ran through the cabin. Drinks tilted slightly in their cups, passengers shifted in their seats, and a young boy clutched his mother's arm. Yet Chuck remained unshaken. He made a slight movement with his hand, almost imperceptible, but it conveyed an unmistakable message. Remain calm. Panic solves nothing. The tension in the cabin was palpable. The flight attendants and passengers alike began moving more deliberately, unconsciously matching Chuck's rhythm. Even those who didn't recognize him could feel the calm authority emanating from economy class. Every whisper, every nervous glance, every subtle shift of movement seemed to orbit around his presence. And then, just as the murmurs reached a low hum of collective anxiety, Chuck's eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the monitors in front of the flight crew. Something critical had triggered in the cockpit, yet the pilots were calm, following protocol. Chuck didn't intervene overtly, but his awareness alone seemed to magnify the sense that something extraordinary was unfolding. The passengers leaned forward in their seats, some craning their necks to see him. Some whispered to friends, "Do you think he knows something we don't?" Others felt a strange sense of hope, as if his mere presence was a protective shield against the unknown danger. The subtle mechanical hum intensified for just a moment. A passenger dropped a pen, a soft clatter echoing through the aisle. The flight attendants glanced at Chuck nervously. He simply adjusted his posture, maintaining an almost meditative calm, his eyes scanning the cabin like a predator assessing its surroundings. But in this case, a protector. In the next part, the situation escalates. Turbulence worsens, alarms sound, and Chuck Norris's calm is about to transform into a display of control so precise, so unexpected, that every passenger will be left in stunned awe. The subtle vibrations had grown stronger, now enough to unsettle passengers who were clutching armrests or gripping the tray tables. A soft hum of mechanical alarms sounded from the cockpit, and a faint tension ran through the cabin. For most people, this would have been a moment to panic, to call for help, or to freeze in fear. But Chuck Norris remained the embodiment of calm precision. Seated in economy, he shifted slightly, scanning the cabin, the flight attendants, and the subtle indicators of mechanical issues on the overhead monitors. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly, focusing. He didn't speak, but his entire presence seemed to convey one clear message. Do not panic. Follow my lead. The passengers noticed it almost instinctively. A woman clutching her purse relaxed her grip slightly. A young boy peeked up at Chuck from the seat in front of him, sensing reassurance without words. Phones were quietly raised, capturing every motion, every subtle adjustment of posture, as if the audience knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. The vibrations intensified again. Drinks jostled in cups, a small bag shifted slightly on the overhead rack, and the low hum of the engine seemed off, but the pilots remained focused, following procedures. Chuck leaned forward slightly, a subtle gesture that only the flight attendants could interpret. One of them hesitated, unsure what to do next. Chuck's calm gaze met hers. She understood instantly. Trust the calm. Do not act rashly. She moved through the aisle with renewed confidence, assisting nervous passengers, her voice steady, almost mimicking Chuck's aura of control. If you were seated near Chuck Norris right now, would you trust his calm, or would panic take over? Comment below, and tell us your city or country. A sudden jolt ran through the plane, slightly stronger this time. The subtle alarms from the cockpit grew louder, yet the flight crew did not waver. Passengers gasped lightly, some gripping the armrests more tightly, and a nervous whisper ran through the cabin. "What's happening?" Chuck Norris didn't flinch. Instead, he subtly stood, still calm, his movements deliberate and precise. A ripple ran through the passengers, a mix of awe and curiosity. Nobody questioned him. Nobody resisted his presence. They simply followed his lead unconsciously. His aura of authority, built not on fear but on mastery, controlled the room without a single word. He raised his hand ever so slightly, a silent gesture toward the flight attendants. They responded immediately, moving with deliberate coordination, reassured by his unshakable calm. The passengers, sensing the shift, began relaxing incrementally, mirroring the subtle change in energy radiating from Chuck. The mechanical vibrations intensified again, enough that passengers now felt it in their chests. The plane, which had been gliding smoothly moments ago, seemed to respond to his presence alone. Chuck leaned slightly forward, assessing the subtle indicators. The hum of the engines, the blinking of cockpit lights, the micro-movements of overhead panels. Everything. He understood it all in an instant. Then, without speaking, he moved to a slightly more commanding stance. His calm precision radiated outward, creating a visible effect on everyone in the cabin. The flight attendants, pilots, and passengers were all reacting, some unconsciously, to the shift in the atmosphere. Panic that had started to build now receded slightly. The plane felt, contained, stabilized, as if under his silent control. Chuck's eyes flicked to the young boy again, who had been nervously holding his mother's hand. He gave a tiny nod, almost imperceptible, and the boy straightened, reassured. The passengers were witnessing an impossible scene. A man in economy class commanding the attention and calm of an entire cabin, all without a single raised voice. Then, 12 minutes after takeoff, the plane began a gradual deceleration. Not violently, not alarmingly, but enough that every passenger noticed. A subtle jolt ran through the cabin again, but the difference was clear. Chuck's calm presence had transformed the situation. The plane was stopping, not out of panic, but through an almost mystical alignment of focus, awareness, and authority. Whispers filled the cabin. Is he controlling it? No, it must be a coincidence. That's Chuck Norris. Some passengers raised their phones, recording every moment, knowing they were witnessing something that defied explanation. Chuck remained calm, surveying the cabin with serene awareness. He wasn't boasting, he wasn't intimidating, and he wasn't reacting with anger. He simply existed in perfect control of the moment, guiding everyone through a scenario that could have easily turned into chaos. In the next part, the passengers and the world will finally understand the full extent of Chuck Norris's presence. The reveal of his power and calmness will leave everyone stunned and inspired. The plane had slowed significantly. The subtle vibrations had ceased, replaced by a profound silence. Passengers glanced around, some holding their breath, others wide-eyed, unsure of what had just happened. The flight attendants exchanged nervous glances, realizing that whatever small mechanical issues had triggered earlier had been resolved. But there was no obvious explanation. All eyes naturally returned to one man, Chuck Norris. Seated calmly in economy, he adjusted his seat slightly, his posture relaxed yet commanding. For 12 minutes, he had remained the eye of the storm, the calm center in a sea of rising panic. And now, the passengers could finally see the magnitude of what had occurred. The murmurs began slowly at first. A woman whispered, Did he just stop the plane?" A man near the aisle shook his head in disbelief. "There's no way. It has to be a coincidence, right?" But as more people looked, the realization grew. Phones recorded every moment. The quiet confidence, the subtle gestures, the way the attendants had responded instinctively to Chuck's presence. The video would later go viral, but at that moment, it was real-time awe and disbelief. One of the flight attendants finally approached Chuck cautiously. "Sir, we don't know how to say this, but the plane, it stopped, and the systems are stabilizing perfectly. Her voice trembled slightly, both from relief and amazement. Chuck gave a small nod. "It's okay," he said, calm and steady. No one needed to panic. "Everything is under control." His voice was quiet, but it carried authority. Everyone in the cabin felt it, even the passengers who had never seen him before. The calmness wasn't just in words. It was palpable, like a force that had passed through the cabin and reset the tension. A passenger finally leaned toward his friend and whispered, "That's Chuck Norris." He didn't even have to touch the controls. Another muttered, "I've seen movies, but this is real life." Phones clicked and recorded the silent acknowledgement that something legendary had just happened, that if you were on this flight, how would you feel right now? Safe, amazed, or completely stunned? Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Chuck rose slightly from his seat and scanned the cabin. Passengers instinctively straightened in their seats, as if responding to an unspoken command. He didn't shout or demand attention. His very presence compelled focus, respect, and calm. Even the flight attendants moved with renewed precision, seemingly guided by an invisible hand of authority. The captain finally spoke over the intercom, his voice calm but tinged with astonishment. "Ladies and gentlemen, the minor technical issue has been resolved. We apologize for the earlier disturbances. We are proceeding to our destination safely." There was a pause, and, we'd like to acknowledge the calm presence of a passenger who helped maintain composure throughout the situation. A collective gasp ran through the cabin. People turned to see Chuck seated casually in economy, his calm demeanor unchanged. Some passengers clapped quietly, others stood, pointing and whispering. The legend was real, and now they understood the full extent of it. Chuck did not gloat. He simply nodded at the attendants and returned to his seat. His calmness, humility, and control had been on full display, and the passengers were left in stunned awe. The power of presence, not aggression, had saved the day. Phones continued to record as passengers tried to process what they had witnessed. Social media would later explode with posts. Chuck Norris stopped a plane with his presence. The calmest man alive just saved everyone without lifting a finger. I was on that flight, and I will never forget it. Even those who had not recognized him initially now whispered his name, their voices full of respect and disbelief. Chuck had turned an ordinary flight into an extraordinary lesson in calm, control, and silent power. In the final part, the story goes viral. Millions worldwide will witness Chuck Norris's calm mastery. The flight attendants and passengers will reflect on what they experienced, and the ultimate moral will leave everyone inspired. You won't want to miss it. By the time the plane touched down safely, the passengers were still buzzing with disbelief. Phones were out, videos were being shared, and whispered conversations filled the cabin. Everyone had witnessed something extraordinary. A man who had turned what could have been a terrifying situation into a story of calm, presence, and absolute control. Passengers who had initially been nervous now smiled, shook their heads in wonder, or laughed softly at the surreal events. "Did that really just happen?" One young woman whispered to her friend. "I can't believe he didn't even yell. And the plane, it stopped perfectly." Social media erupted almost instantly. Videos from multiple angles captured Chuck Norris's calm movements, the subtle gestures that had reassured flight attendants, and the passengers' reactions. Comments poured in, "Only Chuck Norris could handle this. The calmest man alive just saved everyone. I was on that flight, and I'm still in shock." The story spread quickly, and the headlines were impossible to ignore. Chuck Norris saves flight without moving a finger. Legendary calm. Passengers witnessed Norris's presence stop a plane. 12 minutes of silence. 12 minutes of awe. Chuck Norris on board. News outlets interviewed passengers who had been seated near him. Many struggled to find words to describe the experience. "It was unreal," one passenger said. "He didn't even touch anything, but the entire cabin felt safer. It was like he was controlling everything with his presence alone." Flight attendants and crew echoed the sentiment. "I've never experienced anything like it," one attendant said. "Normally, turbulence or mechanical alerts cause panic, But Chuck, he radiated calmness. The passengers instinctively followed his lead without realizing it. It was incredible. Chuck himself remained humble. In interviews, he deflected attention from himself, focusing instead on the importance of staying calm under pressure. Panic doesn't solve problems, he said simply. If you remain calm and focused, you can handle almost anything. His words were short, but every listener felt the weight behind them. If you believe calmness and courage can change a situation, type respect in the comments. Share your city or country too, and let everyone know where you're watching from. The story did more than entertain, it inspired. People around the world commented on the importance of presence, self-control, and humility. It wasn't just about Chuck Norris or a plane in distress. It was about the lesson he demonstrated. A composed mind can turn chaos into order. Memes, GIFs, and compilations of the flight's videos spread across platforms. Fans marveled at his ability to influence a room without force. Others debated, did he really stop the plane? Or did his calm just make everyone else act right? Either way, the result was undeniable. The cabin had been transformed by his presence alone. Even months later, the story remained viral. Motivational videos cited the event as a masterclass in leadership under pressure. Pilots and crew used it as a teaching example. Observe calm, act deliberately, and maintain control, just like Chuck Norris. The passengers who were on the flight recounted the story repeatedly. Each retelling emphasized the same themes. Fear turned into calm, panic turned into control, and a legendary man showed that quiet authority can be more powerful than any action. And through it all, Chuck remained true to himself. Humble, composed, and unwavering. No one left with bruised egos. No one was injured. And the moral was clear. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't physical, but mental, emotional, and composed under pressure. The plane had landed, but the impact of what had transpired continued to ripple across the globe. Millions watched, shared, and reflected on the story, realizing that courage, calmness, and presence could truly change everything, even stop a plane. If you were inspired by Chuck Norris's calm mastery, type respect in the comments and subscribe for more incredible stories. Remember, calm, courage, and presence can make the impossible possible.